Hello and welcome to this tutorial on a general explanation of the Unity editor. I've got Unity 5.4.0 here, so I'm going to open that up. And what you're first going to be faced with when you launch Unity is this kind of login screen right here. And some people will just want to skip past this and move on and just get into the editor, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you to create an account if you don't have one already. So this is going to be your Unity account, and there's a reason why you would want to do that later that you'll see. I'll log in with mine. And once you're logged in, it's going to show you a blank area. For me, it's got some previous projects I've worked on here, and what we're going to do first is hit New, and I'm going to save mine on the desktop. And this is a whole new project, so it's going to be an actual folder system, and I'm going to call this General Explanation. And we're going to make sure it says 3D, so you make sure that's checked, and then that's it. Make sure Enable Unity Analytics is off. It should be by default. And then hit Create Project. So what's happening here is it's creating a folder system on the location that you set. So mine's on my desktop. I'm going to go ahead and kind of move the window out of the way and drag the folder over. So there's a folder called General Explanation, the name of my project. If I open that, you're going to see several folders: Assets, Libraries, Project Settings, Temp. For today's purposes, we're only going to care about Assets, and inside Assets there's nothing. Okay, so anything in this folder will be what you have available to you in the Unity editor. Alright, so now let's look at the Unity editor. So by default, you're going to see that the editor is laid out in this kind of complex way, and if you've never seen this before, you're like, I don't know where to start. And that's why I'm making this video here, to kind of help you understand how to think about it. It's actually quite simple. Up on the top right, there's this layout button, and there's default, and that's what we're looking at now. So if you ever modify the windows, like you tweak things, or like you accidentally grab something and pull it out, and it looks weird to you and it doesn't make any sense anymore, like I'm doing right now, just go back up here to layout and hit default. It'll go ahead and re-put everything back the way you expect. And there's some other ways here that some people prefer. Most Adobe softwares have this kind of thing where you can lay out the individual windows within the, or tabs, I guess, within the software itself. Alright, so we're looking at, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 certain tabs. And then there's also tabs kind of behind here. You see there's Scene View, Game View, Asset Store, alright, and Console down here. And that's fine. These are things we'll actually be covering all of these today. So we're looking at a scene up here, this 3D view. This is probably the most attractive looking of the panes because it's got some color and some icons. Like, what is this? So let's start there. One of the things I like to show you are some hotkeys. So if you press and hold Alt, you'll see that your cursor, if it's over the scenes view, turns into an eyeball. And if you use the left mouse button on your mouse and you hold down Alt and you click and drag with that, you'll see you can tumble around in three-dimensional space. And what you're really doing here is just giving yourself some depth perception, because you are looking at a 3D world, a 3D virtual world here that has nothing else other than some sort of grid here that's going to be a guide for you. Looks like a sun and a camera and the sky, right? And there's the sun up there. Actually, really quickly, just as a fun trick here, let off Alt and then click on the sun, left click, okay, and then press like the E key on your keyboard. E is in Edward, and you'll get these handles that look like circles, right? And if you were to click on, say, like the red or the blue or the green line, and click and drag, you see that sun moves? That's basically the directional light. So this light here casts light on the entire scene, the 3D scene, with a sun coming from somewhere way up in the sky, just like it would in real life. So that's just a fun little thing that happens with the directional light. Let's go back to the editor though, and we'll get back to this 3D scene view later. Down below here you have these two sections under the Project tab, and these sections are actually looking at exactly the same thing. You can almost think of them as your file explorer, okay? So for instance, we're looking at assets with no folders below, but let's create a folder underneath there by right-clicking on it and saying Create Folder. and then we're going to call it scenes. Okay, and the reason we created that is because we're going to save this scene into that folder. And we have a folder now showing up there, and then if you click on assets, you can see it shows up there. And what's cool is, if I bring Unity kind of out of the way again, and let's go back to my general explanation folder. If you go to assets, oops, double click on it, you see scenes is there. So that is basically the same view as what you're getting right here. Alright, so if you were out in you know, you're moving data or 3D models or something like that over to the scenes folder or some other area of your project, you could do that out here in Finder or Windows Explorer, whatever operating system you're using. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to right click and say new text document, and I'm just going to call this test. Okay, and now if I go back into Unity, you'll notice there's this test.txt right there, and then I can delete it here, and it gets deleted out in the folder as well. Alright, so these are essentially, you know, your areas where you can create and destroy files, same as your file explorer. Alright, that's something I like to make clear to people, because if you ever work with a group, or you're working with me and I'm trying to help you and you want to send me your project so I can take a look at it, typically what you want to do is take your entire project folder, which contains assets, project libraries, or project settings, library, all that stuff, and you just compress that. So say compress into a zip folder, and yeah, it won't let me right now because I have the editor open. But anyway, the idea is you would zip this up and then send the individual zipped up compressed folder to me, and then I can open the entire Unity project, because it's not just one file, it's an entire folder system that is the Unity project. Alright, now the hierarchy is still saying untitled up here, because that's our scene name, and as you right to the left of the scene name, there's a Unity icon and then this little twirl caret. So if you click that, you can see you can kind of open and close your assets that are inside of the hierarchy. Let's go ahead and name our scene by saving it. So we'll go to File, Save Scene As, and in the Scenes folder, we're just going to call this 01 and save it, because there might be a 02, 03, you never know. Scenes, the way you can think of them, are kind of like compositions if you're an After Effects person, or if you're into programming. You know, these would be entire. Actually, I'm not good. I don't know of a good analogy for this for programming, I suppose, but you know, it's a conglomeration of a 3D virtual scene that's got all sorts of assets inside, and it's functional. In video games, these would be called levels, right? So it's like you're going from one level to the next, and a lot of times you have to load in between them. That's a way to think about it too. Now here in the hierarchy view, you can see we have a main camera and a directional light. Like I was talking about the directional light earlier, it's just casting light. But why do we need a camera? So if you're coming from a software development background and you do programming, you got to understand that 3D worlds, 3D virtual worlds, have basically infinite perspectives, right? So you have to give a perspective that's going to be rendered out to the software so it can create your frames, your images that the user is going to use. And if you notice, if I say double click on this camera and zoom out a little bit, there's like this pyramid. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to tilt down. Again, I'm holding down Alt and dragging with my left mouse button. You see this like pyramid, and it ends up as a big rectangle. And that's basically the rendering view. And if I press E on the keyboard, I have this rotation, and you see if I click and drag on one of the lines, you're going to change the camera preview here. This is what's going to be rendered. You can rotate the camera askew, you can change it all like that, and those are all the properties. This is actually called the frustum. So if you're ever working with someone who does virtual reality, you know, they really talk about frustums a lot in that, because that's typically where the VR headset would be if you're wearing a headset, and that would be your head right here. And with a VR headset, since you can turn your head, you know, they have tracking sensors in the headsets that track orientation. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm reorienting the camera around as if it were a head. Now, the other measurements they do with VR headsets is position. So if I hit W on the keyboard, I can kind of simulate that by moving this up and down, left and right. Okay. And that brings me to talking about this panel over here on the right, the inspector. Okay, so this is where the magic happens in Unity, typically with scripts and features. And if you're not a programmer, this is also where you would do a lot of your work. So for instance, this camera, if I click on it, you can see it's got a transform function, a camera function, and actually another name for these instead of functions should actually be scripts or built-in scripts. And there's a GUI layer, a flare layer, and audio listener. I don't really touch any of this stuff except for the camera and the transform. But instead of you feeling like you have to memorize all this stuff, let me show you kind of how this is constructed. So over here in the hierarchy, you can do this along with me. I'm going to right click and say create empty. Okay, and it's going to just create an object called game object. Alright, so when you select that, you'll see you probably have some sort of handle here. If you hit W, you'll get this one I'm looking at right now, and that's the move tool. And if you hit E, you can rotate it, and R. There's really nothing there. It's just a point in space, a point in your virtual world. And if you look on the right, the only script it has associated with it is transform. Alright, this is a built-in script of Unity. You can't change this script because it's sort of, fundamental in how Unity works. But typically, you're going to use empty game objects to kind of build out your own individual things that you want in your virtual world. And what I mean by that is if you hit add component, there are lots of scripts in Unity, and it's going to give you a little search box here. So let's make it a light. So I'm going to just type in light, and I click that. So now light comes up, and there's all these. Well, these are actually public variables that you can change, or drop boxes. But if you're a programmer, just know that all these things being exposed here to an artist or anybody using the editor with your object, these are public variables, and that's why they all show up here. So the light script is on there. Now this thing is a light. You see its icon kind of changed. Now let's add another component. Let's search for camera. Okay, there's the camera component. So now it's a camera that emits light. Okay, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change the light to be a let's see, a spotlight, right? So now it's kind of like a camera that has a flashlight associated with it, and we could get rid of the directional light by just over here in the hierarchy clicking on it, hitting delete. So now you can see the sky sort of changes, and now we have this little directional light on the camera, and we can get rid of the other main camera. So now all we have in our scene is our object, and that's it. And the reason I show you this is Unity is an object-oriented system. If you've ever heard that terminology used before, it's all based on these things called game objects, and the way it's written right here is actually how you would reference it in scripting and stuff like that. So let's talk about scripting a little bit here. And I know some of you will cringe when I bring that up, but some of you might get excited about that, and that's good. The typical thing you would do in Unity is either learn scripting yourself as well as the art stuff and do it all as kind of like a jack of all trades, or you will work with someone else who has the other complementing skill set. So me, I kind of do everything, but I have seen lots of student teams that come work with me that they've got good scripters on their team, good digital artists, and they're way more productive than I am because they can kind of get parallel work done. And that's how studios work with Unity. And I encourage you to kind of make a team if you got a project. One or two people usually, if you've got the general skills, can get up to speed. All right, so let's put a script on this camera, or on this light camera. I'm not sure what we're going to do with it, but I just want to show you the scripting interface. So first thing I want you to do is come down here to Assets and right click somewhere out here and say create a new folder, and we're going to call it Scripts. This is just for organization. You could just plop everything on the root level and it doesn't matter. They're just folders. But inside the scripts folder, I'm going to right click, say create C# script. Of course you can see these other ones here. They have shader scripts, they've got JavaScript, C# script, and editor test C# script. I don't ever use that. I hardly ever use shader script. I use either JavaScript or C#. This is going to be most of your interaction functionality things that you build into Unity. So I'm going to say C# because that's what I'm familiar with. And these are classes. Okay, so if you're a programmer, you'll kind of know what I mean by that. I'm gonna name it before you click off of it. You gotta name it because it'll actually change the script internally for the name of the class. So we're just gonna call this one general. Okay, and then click off of it, and you'll see if I sort of click it over here, we've got a preview, but we don't really ever use this other than just to reference what's in it. So what I'm actually going to do is double click on it, and when you double click on it, it might try to open Visual Studio, which could take a long time. For me, I've got it set to a program called MonoDevelop that comes with Unity that sort of opens faster. Alright, and real quick, if you'd like it to not use Visual Studio and just use MonoDevelop, let me show you how to do that. Just go to Editor, Project Settings, Preferences. Edit, Preferences, and then when this box pops up, you choose External Tools, and then for the external script editor, you want to choose MonoDevelop instead of Visual Studio. Okay, I'm going to close that. Alright, so when you're looking at a script in Unity, you have to understand that these are real-time pieces of software that you're writing, meaning it's going to generate a frame rate as fast as possible to be as performant as possible, and it's basically going to run a series of frames through time, or pictures. Okay, so since it is in real time, we can program that to have things happen at the start of the application or things that happen every frame. Alright, so before I get into those, let's make a variable. So the first thing I want to do is make a public variable because I want this to be exposed to my designer that I'm working with. Okay, so I'll say public, and we'll say integer or int, and then we'll name it my number, and then just put a semicolon at the end there, and then I'm going to hit Control S or File Save, and we've got this saved. And you don't have to close MonoDevelop, you just literally click back on the Unity editor. If you look down here in the bottom right, there should be a little spinning animation that's going to cache or parse your file, and if there's any errors in it, it'll tell you down here at the console, which you can make bigger by clicking console, and it'll show you any errors. And there's nothing happening right now, so there's nothing listed. Now this script is here. You can see that it's updated with my little line of code. I can drag that out onto the game object, and now it's in the scene because this thing's in the scene, and I dragged it out there. And you notice over here on the right, our light function or our light script is still there. Our camera script is still there, and you can twirl those closed to kind of make room. And then here is the general script, and then look, my number is right there. Now I can edit it, or my designer can edit that to whatever they'd like. Okay, and what you can do also is set it as a range, as a slider bar. So let's do that. So I'm going to double click general again. Okay, and then here I'm going to put in a bracket. This is a convention you would use, I suppose, in this is a convention you would use for Unity alone. I'm not sure I would ever see this in other C# scripts, but I'm going to put range. Okay, and then here we'll put 0 to 10, and then right bracket. And it looks like it was looking for float values, so this may not work, but we'll give it a shot. Game object. Oh no, it worked. So there it is. So now instead of a field, we've got this slider bar that we can use. And those types of things, work for all different types of variables, floats, boolean. So let me do a boolean real quick. That's kind of interesting. If you want to just have a switch somewhere in your code, you could say public bool, and we'll call this switch. We'll call it switch on, because switch is actually a keyword in C# for other things. And put that there. And if you notice, after it caches, it pops up right here. It's a checkbox now, boolean on off, that the designer can set as needed. What else? Oh, we can also put in like explanations on what these things are for mouse over. So let me find out where that's at. Tooltip. So these are called tool. You can put in a tooltip where you mouse over the top of that, and just like we did range up there, I could put in a bracket and say TOOL tooltip, and inside of parentheses we just put a string value and say this is where you switch the switch on. Not sure what this switch is supposed to do, but that's up to you and your, whatever you're designing. And I'm going to copy this and actually put another tooltip above range, and we'll say this is where you set your integer value. Okay, and then if I go back over to here, you can see if I hover the mouse over the top, that little message pops up. So when you're a programmer and you're working with an artist, this stuff is great because you can make a tool that's one script that's got all these public variables, and they can set all that stuff, and it will, be like a tool you'd find in like Photoshop or something that they're used to using the graphical user interface. Alright, so that generally is how the scripts all get appended. Obviously you can just keep adding more and more stuff, and this will have more and more functionality. What else should I cover? So for an artist here, if you want to follow along with this is kind of a cool thing. If I go to Game Object, 3D Object, Terrain, there's this set object in Unity called Terrain, and it's going to create this giant plane. And this plane is huge. I mean, it's just massive right now. I think if I zoom out or if I double click on it, it'll show it to us. And every one of these here is, I believe, 10 meters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe that's 100 meters. Yeah, I think it is 100 meters. So by clicking on the terrain object, you can, over here on the right, there's the terrain script. This is a really complex script. Again, it's a built-in script, and if you click this gear button, down below it says terrain width and length. Yeah, so that's 500 by 500 meters. That's the default units in Unity are meters, and that's great. And you can change this, of course. So let's just do 100 by 100 meters. Alright, so now we have this 100 by 100 meter area, and what I want to do next is kind of sculpt this terrain. So where you clicked on terrain and clicked on the gear, there's these other tools here, and these tools let you sculpt the terrain just like you would with mountains and stuff. Now your editor might be slowing down right now because of this little job down here in the bottom right hand corner that says it's calculating lighting. Let's turn that off real quick. So you just go to Window, Lighting, Window Lighting, and this lighting panel shows up. Really all you got to do here is down below there should be a button that's grayed out that says Build, and then right next to it is a checkbox that says Auto. And what it's doing is it's auto baking your lights into the textures, and we don't want that because it constantly slows the system down every time we make a change. So uncheck the box Auto, and then later when we're ready to bake in those lighting textures, we can hit Build and it'll just automatically do it all. It'll take a long time, but typically you want to save that for later. Now you can close the lighting panel. Alright, so I show this to every student I work with because it's kind of a way to get ownership of making yourself a little virtual world that's a first person based, meaning something you can drive around with a keyboard and mouse or a gamepad. So on the terrain, again selected, the first button to the left is raise and lower terrain, and you have brushes here like you would with Photoshop, so you can pick any brush you want, and when you click it's gonna kind of bump up the ground based on the shape of your brush. Alright, so now this is why you want the Alt key and the left mouse drag, because it's gonna kind of spin around and give you some context with depth perception. Right now it's spinning in kind of a weird angle. If you notice, as I move, it's the land's going far away. It's because the anchor point of what I'm looking at isn't right, and don't let that trip you up. All I'm trying to say is, when I spin, I want the land to be dead center, and the way you do that is double click on the land, give it your focus. So when I zoom in, rolling the middle mouse wheel, and I press Alt, Now when I spin, the land is in the dead center. So whatever you're working on as a designer, you should probably just like double click first. Like if I'm working on the game object, I'll double click it first. Now it's in the dead center. So if I zoom in, it'll always be in the center. Okay. Going back to my terrain here, that's pretty good. I'm going to obviously add some more mountains. If you want to make this brush bigger, you have brush size and opacity. Opacity is kind of like, again, here's their tooltips. If you mouse over them, you can see strength of applied effect. The brush size is the size of the brush. So if I want to make it a small little tiny hill, you can do that. You can zoom in. And consider you are working on an area that's 100 by 100 meters. So if you put a person in the middle of this with a VR headset, these are actually going to look like really tall hills, or maybe even mountains. Alright, so it doesn't take much to make detail in 3D, especially if you're going to interact with it in a realistic or experiential way with like a virtual reality headset or an augmented reality headset. Alright, so now what we're going to have to do is mess with these other buttons. So paint textures. So I'm going to click this middle button here that looks like a paintbrush, and it says edit textures down below. And if you say add texture by clicking on that, this little add texture box is going to pop up, and then if you press the select button under none texture 2D, you'll see another box pops up, and it's got basically every file in your assets folder that can be used. And none of these make any sense because they're just white, some sort of particle background, check mark. None of these are grass textures or rock textures. So we want to go ahead and find something like that. So I'm going to close that box and then go up here to assets, and there are built-in assets that we can import into our project here. And basically it's just going to copy everything over to our project from somewhere else on the computer. So I'm going to go to Assets, Import Package, and then we're going to pick Environment. And like I said, it's copying stuff over on our hard drive to our project folder here on the desktop. And now it's showing me a list of stuff that it's copying in to let me kind of de-check or make sure everything's checked. Typically when you look at and you import in any kind of Unity package, like if you work with me and you're like, hey, I need help making a button, and I've got something ready to go for you that's going to work, I might send you a .unity package file that you would import into your project, and it's going to do this when you import it in. It'll kind of show you everything that's inside, all the types of assets. That could be .cs, that's a C# file, .txt, that's a text file. These .prefabs are Unity specific prefabricated objects, which that's actually what we're going to eventually use. There's all sorts of stuff in this, and this is really just a built-in package that gives us some stuff for our environment, like grass and anything. Anyway, hit import, and you'll notice on the bottom left in your assets folder there's going to be a new folder, probably called standard assets. That's what Unity calls them. Quite a bit is being imported. That's why it takes a little bit of time. Alright, yeah, so standard assets you can click on. And there's also an editor folder that comes in. You won't use this, not today. But in standard assets, you want to click that, and then if you click environment, you can see there's all sorts of stuff in there. We're not going to actually dig through the folders, but now when you click your terrain, for instance, go back to the paintbrush, paint texture, hit edit texture, add texture, and this first texture is going to be blanketed across our entire piece of terrain. Alright, so we're going to choose select here. You got all sorts of stuff. Now let me explain what you're looking at here. So this right here, this broadleaf desktop, or this one that have like trees in them, these are textures for trees. They're not meant for being blanketed on the ground. Of course you can apply them and it'll look weird. It'll just look like a bunch of tiled trees flat on the ground. So what we're looking for is something that's meant for the ground, and like these here, these are the cores of the trees, like for a stump, so that's not what we're looking for. Oh, and if you see these like purple areas, and it says _normal at the end, when you do 3D artwork, some of you digital artists will know this, there is a type of encoding of a picture that you can do that it makes it kind of like shades of these purple and pinks, and it creates a bump texture or map that the shader can use. And that's why those exist, is it kind of enhances these pictures to look bumpy and like they're a three-dimensional surface that has texture to it that's not actually in the mesh. So it's sort of a digital trick. But again, we're looking for like these flat textures like this one here called grass hill albedo, or grass rocky albedo, or cliff albedo specular. I'm going to go ahead and pick grassy rocky albedo, and I'm just going to double click that. And you'll see it goes right in there. And then let me see if there's a normal texture for that. See, this one here says albedo. That's your general color. And then normal is the bumpiness, like I was saying. So I'm going to select that and then scroll down to this. This is called grassy rock albedo. Let's just search for grassy. Nope, doesn't look like it. And the reason it doesn't, to me, it doesn't look like it is because I see the one I just picked, and typically there'd be one named the same with underscore normal next to it that I could use, but we're not going to find it here. So I'm going to, oops, I went ahead and selected that. So I'm going to get rid of it, the way you do it is you hit select and you scroll up, and where it says none, you just choose none, and then now there's nothing in there. Press add. Now it blanketed textured my entire area. It's pretty dark, and that's the reason for that is we don't have a directional light in the scene, a sun. So let's just put a sun in real quick by going to game object, 3D object, I'm sorry, no, game object light, directional light. Okay, and it just arbitrarily puts the directional light in somewhere, and that's okay. We can adjust that later. Alright, now going back to the terrain, the last thing I want to show you with this is adding in like secondary textures. Like if I hit add texture under the paintbrush tool, again I'm going to append on another grass texture, and this time we're going to choose grass hill albedo. Okay, and then I'm going to hit add, and then right now I'm still selected on the first one, but I want to select the second one, and you see it didn't change anything. But what's cool about this is I'm going to increase the brush size, and you can see I got like a little paintbrush tool, and I can start adding in like grassy areas below the hills. Like say the water runs off the hills, and I'm going to turn the opacity up a little bit, and you'll start to see it to become like more grassy. There we go. So you can see it's more green in this area than it is up on the hills. And then you can of course append in more things. Like here I'll pick cliff albedo specular. Alright, and then I'll select that, and I'll take my brush size and make it smaller. So now I'll put on the side of the mountain here, kind of this cliff face. If I zoom in, twirl around, you see we start to have some sort of blended three areas that make a little sense. Okay, but it is just a mesh still, so we want like trees and grass and stuff like that. So this other button here, we can place trees by, we got to add a tree though. So just like we picked the texture, let's pick a tree. So you hit edit trees, add tree, and this other add tree box pops up. And anytime in Unity you see this like little circle, looks like a little bullseye, that thing is browse. Okay, so it's going to open up your assets folder with anything that makes sense for a tree, and there's pictured the tree itself. So I'm just going to pick this conifer desktop. The difference between that and if you see some mobile is there like maybe there's less detail in the mobile version that works on a mobile phone, whereas desktop will work on a desktop computer. I'm just going to pick this one and then hit add, and I've got this huge brush, right, and I don't really quite want that, so I'm going to change the brush size to be down lower. And then if I just click once, I'm not clicking and dragging, just clicking once, it creates this really tall tree. So I'll hit Control Z to undo that, and I'm going to make the tree size different. So tree height, I'm going to drag to the left. This range slider kind of lets us have a variation of different size trees within that range. Okay, there's a tree right there. And we can add more. Now you could go like this and just add tons and tons of trees to have a huge forest, but just remember, when you are working with a game engine like Unity, This thing has to render frames or pictures as many times per second as possible. And trees are very detailed objects, and if you have too many of them, too close to the user, you can actually slow the system down. You'll get a lower frame rate. That's something to consider as you design your digital artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and Control Z, or if you put a bunch of trees out and it's not within your undo button to get rid of, you can actually press Shift and click with the tree button and it will go away. So I'm just going to create a couple trees out here, and there we go. And then the last thing I guess is grass. So we're going to click on this button here that's to the left of the gear, edit details, add grass texture. Now a grass texture is again something to browse for, but it's a picture instead of a mesh, and it's actually a PNG. So what's really cool is people that are artists will go out and take pictures of flowers and grasses, and then in Photoshop they'll cut out the negative space so it's transparent. So like this grass here, this green, this like flat green area, that is transparency. So if I double click that, or alpha channel, and hit add, I zoom into like the base of this tree here, I can actually paint this grass in there. That's a lot of grass. I didn't quite want that much. So again, you can hold down Shift and get rid of some of it. Or what you can do is change your brush settings. So down here I'm going to change the opacity to go way lower. Well, it's still too much. Let's go really low. Change the target strength to be down lower. That's tricky. You can also change, actually that's it. So I'm going to turn that down really low. There we go. That's what I want. Just kind of sparse grass here and there. Grass, just like trees, if you have a lot of it, is going to cause your system to slow way down because there's just too much for the computer to calculate in, you know, we're talking a 30th of a second or a 90th of a second, and this is pretty rough on your video card if you had too much stuff. And you know, we want to save a lot of that computing power for other things in the scene, not just the grass and trees. So right now if you hit play, nothing really happens because we're just going to be looking through that game object camera we made, right? It's just kind of looking off in the distance. If you try to move around with the mouse or the keyboard, nothing happens. So let's make it so that we can walk around this scene. Alright, so actually select your game object if you still have it in your scene and say delete. Okay, so then we're going to add in a character to this to walk around. So you hit game object, or I'm sorry, assets, import package, characters. And these are Unity basic characters, like a first person character, FPS controller right here, that we're going to eventually use. So say import. And again, it's just copying files over into your Unity project. And these are all going to show up under standard assets. And then under characters, under standard assets, if you can navigate there, there should be a folder called first person character. If you want to open that, go to prefabs inside of that. So standard assets, first person character, prefabs. There's an object here called FPS Controller. And if you can't read it for some reason, there's a slider button right here that if you drag to the left, it'll turn this into a list, and now you can actually read the names. So FPS Controller, I'm going to just drag it right out here in the grassy area, and then double click it. So now it's in my frame of reference. And this is a 3D scene that has now a 3D character object built in, and you can see here in the hierarchy it's blue, and that means it's a prefabricated object that we pulled in. And what it is somebody at Unity created this FPS controller, and they saved it as a kind of a complex object. So it's got, like, if I twirl it open, it's got this other thing inside called first person character. And if you click on these over on the right, you can see all the scripts associated with it. Things like the rigid body, that's going to deal with the physics, the audio source. So this is like when you walk, you're going to hear footsteps, and what else is in there? The transform, of course. And then first person character has a camera, so this is where the camera comes into play again, and that's our view into the virtual world. So if you twirl that back closed, now we can operate just like it was a standard object. I want you to select that, press W on the keyboard, and twirl around so you can see the green arrow, and then drag that up. And what you're looking for is, as I zoom in here, you can sort of see the base is below the terrain. It's below the ground. Alright? You want to drag that up on top of the ground so that when it starts, the app starts, it will fall with gravity, but it'll stop on the ground. Alright? So just like we would in real life, gravity's there, so we have to kind of pay attention to that. You can also rotate this thing with the green rotation. You press E and rotate. Now you probably wouldn't want to rotate it like this too much, because you want to start just kind of looking horizontally across the landscape. And the way you can tell is the frustum, remember these lines here, of the camera is sort of facing a certain direction. Alright, so now we'll hit play up top, and this is going to give us a preview of the app that we're making. Yeah, and of course there's the sound effects of the boots walking. And I'm using my mouse to look around, and then on my keyboard I can use the arrow keys, or I can use WASD, and these are typical video game controls. Some other good news for you is if you have like an Xbox controller hooked up to your computer right now, you could use that and it would work right away. Unity's smart enough to know if you got that hooked up, and it'll use the direct input driver to or X input to figure that out. Now this is really annoying to hear the footsteps, right? So let's hit escape to get our cursor back. So there's our cursor after we hit escape, and then you can press the play button again and it stops the preview mode. Let's disable those sound effects real quick. So by selecting FPS Controller over here on the right, you can see where it says footstep sounds, jump sound, land sound. So I'm going to twirl open footstep sounds. I'm going to change the size of the footstep sounds to 0. And then for the jump sound, I'm going to hit this browse button, choose none. And then for the land button, I'll choose none. Okay, now I'll hit play. Now I can walk around, and there's nothing there. Now the problem, though, you might notice, is down below here we got this red dialog saying index out of range exception, error array index out of range. If I hit console I can see it, and it happened a whole bunch of times. Okay, the reason for that is the FPS controller sort of expects there to be footstep sounds in this size thing. So we're going to put that back to 2, right? And then just leave it saying none, right? We'll see if that error goes away. So I'm going to hit clear right here in the console, press play. Yeah, so now it sort of works, but there's no sound, right? That's just a way to fix that. And generally now you have a good idea of what Unity can do, and you have some sort of an app that is here to work with. I want to show you kind of how to publish an app, or how to think about publishing. We don't have to publish this, but if you go to File, Build Settings, Control-Shift-B will also do this. You're going to get this thing here called the Build Settings box. And this is really where you can see why research in Unity is so popular, or building games is so popular. Because Unity is a cross-platform compiler, alright? So if we hit Add Open Scenes, we've got this. If we had other scenes, like I said before, other levels that load and enter, between each other, we could add all those in there. And then platforms. So here's all the platforms Unity supports. I mean, it's just crazy how much stuff is in here. And a lot of them aren't even listed. So like, for instance, if I was building a Windows application, I could build it for the Oculus Rift virtual reality headset, and there's a whole tutorial that goes along with getting those set up. It's not really that involved. WebGL is very exciting because this is 3D in a web browser. Google Chrome comes packaged with WebGL, so your users who go to your website that see your virtual world with Chrome can just see it. They don't have to download any other extra thing. Like, remember when Flash, you had to download a Flash Shockwave player, or I don't know, that kind of dates myself, but like you had to install like Adobe Flash Player to view Flash stuff for a while, and then they finally integrated it into the browsers. Well, WebGL is already integrated, so whatever you build here could be compiled out for a website. Android APK files, so you could actually compile to an APK file. Now you're going to have to, with this, have the Android libraries installed on your computer somewhere, and they always update those. So that's a whole other tutorial. And then also for iOS, and that's also kind of tricky because iOS you can't compile from a Windows machine. You have to compile it from a Mac. But there are some catch-22s with all these. But you see, Tizen. This is like an operating system. It's based on Linux. Xbox 360. Sometimes you have to contact Unity sales though to get a hold of these compilers, but they do have them. So if you really wanted to target one of these platforms, you could do it. Windows Store. This is actually what you compile to when you're building things for the Microsoft HoloLens to do augmented reality. So you see, you can design a 3D world and specify, your output in several different areas, and then maybe make some tweaks or versions of your app. And that's why Unity is so powerful, is you build one application, maybe a few different permutations of the same scene that are specific to the type of platform you're compiling to. For Windows desktop, you're going to be using keyboard and mouse or a gamepad. For like Android, you're going to be using a touch screen or maybe a Bluetooth gamepad. So you have to make a few adjustments for those. And I'm here to help. The AVL is here to help, and if you want to get into that kind of stuff. But the other place to learn about Unity is going to be their own website. So they advertise unity3d.com/learn. So I'll go there, and these are their tutorials. They are constantly adding new ones. There's no way I could keep up building my own tutorials for how in-depth Unity makes them. So you can just click tutorials here. Let me make this a little smaller. And you can see there's all sorts of games they make, and then you can also go by topic. Like I've covered the interface stuff here. They've got their own. They sort of gloss over stuff here and there. That's why I made this video, to help. Last thing I want to show you today in general is the asset store. So back in your Unity editor, go to Window, Asset Store, and I think that tab was already open anyway. And then I don't know, it looks like it's asking me for a survey or something here. I'm going to skip that. If you see this as well, you can say later. Alright, the asset store is kind of like a web browser in your Unity editor here, but what it is for browsing the Unity store. The Unity community is massive. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people across the globe are using and developing with Unity. Full companies are based around using this tool for their own purposes. And that can be games, and it also cannot be games. It just depends on what they're doing. But I mean, there's so much stuff available for free and for fees on this store. So like if I just search for, let's say, I don't know, barrels. So barrel, because I want to put barrels in my scene. Oh, look there, we have barrels, and it's for free, right? So I'm logged in with my Unity account right here, and this, if I wanted to download this and put it in my scene, I hit download. It downloads it. You say import, just like we did with the environment stuff and the characters. So now if I go back to projects, yeah, I've got a folder here called barrel. It was that easy. So now out in the wilderness here, I'll drag a barrel out, and another barrel. That's a big barrel. And now when I hit play, I've got barrels in my scene. Now I'm walking through them, right? So what do you think we need to put in those barrels? I mean, it's a rhetorical question, because really the answer is colliders. These things have to collide. So if I select this barrel, I'm going to look over here on the right for something called Mesh Renderer, and I don't see it there. So what I'm going to do is twirl open barrel. There's another thing underneath, and I click that. There's the Mesh Renderer. We're going to use that mesh for a collider. By finding the object that has the Mesh Renderer, I can hit Add Component, and now search for Mesh Collider. Here's a script that I can add that will use the Mesh Renderer to be a collision system. And then now what happens is when I walk up to the barrel, I stop, right? I can't walk through the barrel. So now you generally have an idea of building Unity scenes. You can actually, the terrain thing is an option. You don't have to actually add terrain if you don't want. Some people will just build things in an external program like Maya or ZBrush or Mudbox or something and bring that in. And then for your floors, you'll just have to add in colliders. There are other colliders I didn't show you, like the mesh collider, or I'm sorry, we use the mesh collider, like a box collider or sphere collider. They're just basically different shapes of colliders. If you need help with Unity and you want to try maybe a third-party plug-in for Unity, there's lots of them, like I was saying, like for the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive, the Microsoft HoloLens, Google Cardboard, Android applications, things like that. If you want to get into that, there are of course tutorials online, but I mean, I'm here to help you very quickly kind of get up and running with those sorts of specialized uses of Unity. And you can contact me at vishelp@iu.edu. And I appreciate you watching this tutorial. Sorry it was kind of a long one, but I wanted you to actually feel like you have some ownership of the Unity editor. It is a tool that's general purpose, not just for video games. And good luck on your research. Thanks.